Hi everyone, I am Kelly and this is Uncorked History. I don't know about where all of you live, but I walked home in a blizzard today, so maybe we can talk some about the weather because that's what people from the Midwest do. So I'm going to turn over to Jamie to introduce our guests. Hi, Jamie.
Hi. So it was like 60 degrees today, so completely opposite weather. All right, we are joined by two awesome guests tonight. The rescheduled Michael Farnham is joining us, and then we have Dr. Bradley J. Sommer, recently earned the PhD, right?
Yeah, it'll be a year in May.
That's so exciting. It's still fresh, you know.
Yeah.
So how's everybody doing?
Doing great.
Doing pretty well. It hasn't been quite as wintry here, so I haven't had to go outside and shovel or throw any salt down or anything. So that's been really nice.
Might be soon though. You tend to get the weather about 12 hours after we do.
Yeah, and I've also just gotten used to the fact that like more often than not, the worst winter weather in this part of the country is actually like after Valentine's Day. Like it's not atypical for like St. Patrick's Day to be 50 degrees or like 12 degrees.
Yeah.
So from here until like June 1st could literally be anything.
That's usually when we get dumped on for snow.
The cat who is joining us here is Smokey. So Smokey is not drinking, but what is everyone else drinking tonight?
Michael, go ahead and start.
Well, I mean, I'm drinking a little 2019 Barolo that I made myself, pulled out of my cellar this afternoon. It's
Excellent.
But it's pretty tasty still.
Good. I have lots of questions about making your own wine, but we'll get to that. Brad, how about you?
So I have two things, two of my favorite things, and also two things that I think give everybody a good sense of where I'm coming from. So the first thing I have here, which I'm going to open here in a second, is the Quietman 8-year-old single malt Irish whiskey, made in Derry. The main level Quietman is a blend, like a lot of Irish whiskey. So like if you just go to the liquor store, state store, and you get Jameson, Tullamore Dew, Bushmills, those are going to be blends. But Quietman does a 5, 8, 9, 12, 15, something like that. Those are all single malts. This one is aged in a sherry cask, which you can see gives it this really beautiful dark color. So I'm going to pour myself a little bit of that and let that kind of mellow for a minute with a couple drops of cool water. And then to drink while I'm waiting for that to sort of develop and get some flavor, I have the far other end of the spectrum. I am an incredibly unclassy person. I have here with me an icy light straight from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the premium light beer, the beer of champions. I've had gallons and gallons of this in my lifetime. So I got Iron City here, and then I got some nice Irish whiskey over there.
All right, I have a quick question, which I know is not a quick question, but do you consider Pittsburgh part of the Midwest?
No.
Interesting.
Pittsburgh is half Midwest, half sort of East Coast. It feels a lot like a scaled down version of like a Chicago, actually, to me, in the way that it's very neighborhoody and such. And there is some of that sort of Midwestern kind of work ethic and politeness. But Pittsburgh's also a city where you can be walking down the street doing absolutely nothing wrong, and someone will just call you a jagoff from down the street, and you'll be like, all right, apparently I was walking funny or something. I guess I deserve that. Thanks. And then you just go on your way. But it's kind of half and half. It's a very unique place.
Fair enough. All right. Jamie, are you drinking?
I am not drinking tonight. I may have imbibed a little too much last night. So I have some delicious water.
Can't go wrong with water. All right, very good. And I am drinking a Pinot Grigio. This is from our friends at LoveCorkScrew. So if you've watched the show for a while, you know we had the proprietor of Love Corkscrew on back in the fall, and she happens to live about a mile away from me in Chicago, and so I've been very supportive of her since. And this is called Good Times, Good Friends, and it's an excellent Pinot Grigio. All right, cool. Well, Michael, then I want to hear about making your own wine, because I have a lot of friends who make their own beer, but I do not know very many people who make their own wine. So I have tons of questions, but I think first is just kind of how did you get into this?
Well, I guess I used to own my own liquor store. I loved wine and everything, and so I opened my own wine shop and had that for a dozen years. And then I sold the business because it got to be, when you own a business, you spend all your time working, you get away from your passion and whatever. So it's like I sold the business and kind of did a sort of a career change. And then one of my coworkers knows we like wine, and when we had to travel for work, we'd always, oh well, what should we get for wine for dinner and everything. And then it's like, then he was always talking, yeah, he makes wine with some friends and whatever. And so my buddy Kurt said, hey, you want to make some wine together with me? And it's like, well, I didn't know how and whatever. So it's like, it's kind of like, people go to the home brew store. Well, the home brew store has a wine section too. And if anybody wants to do it, find a local home brew store, and they'll have lots of people, because there's a whole bunch of wine geeks, beer geeks there that just love to talk about it for hours, and they'll tell you everything you want to know. But for me, it was nice to have a buddy that helped me through, and we made some batches and split them up. And I mean, I didn't know anything about it, and there's like kits you can buy of the juice, and then everything's in the kit, and you follow the instructions and you can make it. And then, I mean, God, there's a million different ways. You can go buy grapes. And I kind of got away from making the kits because the local home brew store, wine shop, my supplier, Midwest Supplies, twice a year, they have fresh grapes that they send in. They freeze them, and you get a choice of California or Italian grapes in the fall, and in the spring you get Chilean grapes. And then I found somebody through the internet that sells Australian juice, and so I can get some fresh Australian juice and make that. And so I've kind of gone way overboard from where I started with my buddy. I don't know if you want me to go through the whole process of doing it, or I mean, it's just like there's just so many different aspects to it, but it's kind of fun. The problem with wine is, unlike beer, is if you make the wine, you can drink it right away, but typically wine needs a little more time to age in the bottle. So I mean, that's why right now I'm drinking the 2019, and it probably still needs a couple more years before it kind of mellows out a little bit. And I guess in the winemaking, there's different ways to do it. I mean, you get the juice, you get buckets. I got my toys, show and tell. The juice comes in a bucket like this, and this bucket was California Syrah. And the bucket has, after you put everything in, you put the lid on it. It has a little filter on top, so you can, because the fermentation process, you have to let the gas escape. And the process to make a batch of wine, I mean, the fermentation takes 7 to 14 days, and then you want to kill the yeast, and you let it sit. And so I mean, you can make a batch after doing that, and then after you'd make it, you'd kill the yeast, and then you'd clear the wine, and then it's ready to bottle. Or I age my wine in oak barrels because I've gone way overboard. So I mean, you can use oak chips and stuff, and you can buy oak chips and oak spirals and things to put in the wine depending on how you want to do it. But I just felt that getting 5-gallon oak barrels would work better, give it a little more realistic. If I'm going to be a winemaker, I want to be, So I age all my wine typically about 6 months in the oak barrels. And then the biggest problem is wine bottles, because I mean, you can buy them, and I can't drink enough to replace them. So I get all friends and whatever, hey, save your wine bottles. And then
That sounds like a good challenge. I got to drink enough to be able to bottle.
Well, and then I guess I also just, after, you've been doing it for a while, I searched for stuff and I found a local winery in Minnesota that was going out of business. And so they had an auction on stuff. And so I actually bought 2 pallets of wine bottles from them that they used for wine bottles in their tasting room. So then I had to basically clean the bottle. Well, I mean, I have to clean the bottles anyways, take the labels off and everything. But that's the biggest thing, is when you're making home winemaking, is sanitation. And the other thing is too, is you want to, I sanitize the bottles 2 or 3 times before I put anything in them. But then also you got to make sure that, your house is clean of smell too, because you don't want to be cooking onions and garlic and making something fancy that smells really good to eat, but it's not good for bottling your wine.
I mean, unless you're making a cooking wine with it, then it's already ready to go. But like,
yeah, well, that's a little different. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a glass of wine while you're cooking. I think they pretty much go hand in hand.
This is much more sophisticated than my grandfather's winemaking process. I knew he made wine, but I didn't know the ins and outs of what he did. So when my husband and I were visiting recently, he took my husband in to show him his setup. And apparently he puts his wine in those like tubs, the plastic tubs that you use for moving and storing stuff. Probably not the most sanitized materials.
Well, I mean, if you clean everything, before you do it, then, I had a relative that made, he called it making wine, but to me it was more like a sherry, because it was like probably about 25% alcohol, because he, spiked it with a little grain alcohol. But that was his little farm wine that he made. But, everybody has their own way to do it. There's there's really no wrong way to do it. It's a lot of fun. And then what I do is, I make way more than I can drink. So then I share with my friends, and I have a long list of people that, oh, when do you have a batch ready? And I just finished bottling about 20 cases of wine. And so next week I'm probably going to be out delivering wine to friends and family, and here you go. So
do you make mostly red or white or both?
Well, I stick with red wines, because the problem with white wines is the clarity, and it's easier with the red wines because people can't tell if there's a little bit of sediment in it. Not that that's bad; it's all natural, and that's something too. I add grape skins to the wine to give it a little more tannin and stuff. And so it's like, I did recently buy a filter so I can filter the wines to clear it a little bit. But the problem with making white wine is getting it so the clarity is really nice, which as a home winemaker is really hard. And I prefer red wines, so it's like, well, I make some.
What point do you filter it? Like, is it filtered after it's aged? Like, when do you actually filter wine?
Well, I would filter it after I aged it, before I put it in the bottle.
Okay. I didn't know if it was filtered before and then it aged, or okay.
But then, you kind of filter it in the process too, because basically you have a big, like these are called carboys. And so I would take the wine from one carboy and transfer it to another carboy, and you leave the sediment in the bottom. So you wouldn't transfer all the juice out. You'll leave a little bit of sediment, which is one way to filter it without using a fancy machine. And the more you transfer it, you transfer it, let it sit so everything can settle out, and then transfer it again in another couple, 3-4 days or a week or something. So the process can take a while, but. And then the other fun part too is, with some of the wines, then, you get certain grape varietals, and like my Chilean wines, I like to blend. So after the finished wine is made, then I'll invite somebody over to come taste wine, and I'll have like 3 or 4 blends that I want to try. And so we'll try them and totally try them blind. Well, I know what they are, so but the other people don't. So I kind of get a second or third opinion to decide, hey, is this going to work or is it not? And if it doesn't, then I maybe adjust it or don't do that. So that's half the fun.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
I don't need more expensive hobbies, but
Well, that and travel. So
I have a question for Brad. So you study race, class, and labor in American history. Could you tell us a little bit more about like the particulars of what you study? Like, is there a particular time period you focus on? And sort of what is it that you are researching?
Yeah, so I studied 20th century US. I think technically my area of expertise for anyone who does those qualifying exams is like post-American Civil War, but really for me it's mostly the 20th century. And without getting into like specific like individual subject matters or like into the nitty-gritty, a lot of the stuff that I look at ends up being, and this ended up being kind of accidental, but ends up being sort of questions around the changing nature of labor and work and class and our understandings of it, particularly in the Midwest. That's the part that wasn't intentional. It didn't really pan out that way. My dissertation was on a Midwestern city, Toledo, Ohio. But then as I was working on it and I was fine tuning it and starting to look towards the things that I would want to investigate more when I turned the dissertation into a book, I realized that a lot of the questions that I was asking in my analysis of Toledo also relates to larger sort of systemic issues and questions that we're dealing with now or not dealing with now about the Midwest. I was actually just talking about this a little bit on Twitter today. History Twitter is a great place and a terrible place, but it's mostly a great place. And somebody tweeted, what's a term in your field that people don't understand? And if they could just understand it, it would totally change the way that they understand what it is you study. And I was like, well, just very simply, the nature and the idea of class is very misunderstood. Specifically, working class is misunderstood, but class more broadly is misunderstood. There are people all over this country that will self-identify as being middle class. And then you look and you go, okay, well, you make $150,000 in, Akron, Ohio, or Canton, Ohio. That's not an expensive place to live. $150,000 there is solidly above middle class. And people also still tend to relate occupation with class, which for a long time, that was a sort of easy shorthand for class, was what you did for a living. But that's changed quite a bit. When people think of working class, a lot of the imagery that pops into their head is that old-fashioned industrial manufacturing economy, a bunch of unionized guys, like basically the main characters of a Bruce Springsteen song come to life. That's what a lot of people think of when they think about working class in this country. But that's changed quite a bit now. I would argue that a lot of professions that for a long time we just sort of didn't qualify as working class, but maybe always kind of just looked at as working class, are now not only solidly working class, but really like the largest, aspects of our working class now. Things like the medical industry. I would say a lot of nurses are working class. I would say that teachers are working class because it's all a lot more relational than it is occupational. How much control do you have over your job? How much control do you have over the benefits that you have of your job? Is your job unionized? Like there's a lot of things about class that sort of supersede what it is specifically that you do. And it's gotten even more complicated. And this is where I want to go in my dissertation to book project, in the sort of post-industrial society that we're in now. A lot of our understandings of class come from industrialization and then consequently deindustrialization. But most cities now have sort of, not most, I shouldn't say most, a lot of cities now have sort of gotten out of that deindustrial moment and are now post-industrial cities. At the start of the podcast, I was talking about Pittsburgh, and Kelly was asking me about Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's a great example. Pittsburgh, Cleveland, San Francisco, like a lot of these cities that used to be very, very like kind of gritty, dirty industrial cities have reinvented themselves into this, meds, eds, tech kind of vein. And the relationship to work is very, very different now than it was for a long time. Add in things like the increasing amount of people in the gig economy, whether by choice or by necessity. A lot of people have multiple kinds of supplemental income. It's not exactly the same as, the single parent who had a couple of jobs, or people who had to work a couple of jobs to make ends meet here and there. The gig economy seems to be sort of a more voluntary opt-in thing, although sometimes it is absolutely necessary. But then also in the, I'm hesitant to say post-pandemic world, because I think we're sort of peri-pandemic.
You're gonna jinx it.
I was going to say, I feel like there's just an indefinite pandemic, just as far as the eye can see. But the pandemic has really shattered our understanding of work too. I mean, we see it all the time on, if you consume any kind of social media, oh, people just don't want to work. Is that really the case? Or is it just the case that people are now realizing that they were taken advantage of for a long time? You see it with people who don't want to go back to an office to do a job that requires a VPN and, a laptop. Why would I spend an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours or more of my day commuting to a job where I sit there when I could do that same job at home in my pajamas and with more ease, more comfort? My boss isn't right over my shoulder. I know the snacks in the refrigerator are going to be better. No one's going to eat my lunch. Study after study shows that people who work at home tend to be actually more productive. So looking at all of those different aspects of how work has changed and how our relationship to work has changed, those are the big questions that I'm looking at. One of the things that I'm really fascinated in is this sort of small but growing push against the idea of the 8-hour workday. For the longest time, that was sort of the thing that the American labor movement loved to talk about, was, the 8-hour workday. You like your weekends, that's because of the labor movement. You like vacation time, the labor movement. The 8-hour workday, the labor movement. And now it's like, maybe 8 hours is actually a little bit too much. A lot of other countries have shifted to 6-7 hour days, 35-hour work weeks, and the results have been pretty good. So the sort of new moment of work that we're in now, looking at how we got to that and the potential social, political, and cultural ramifications of that, are the things that I'm interested in.
So I have a question that's prompted by Brad, but I think we could probably all speak to this, and that is, to what extent is how you think about the world and what you want to study based on where you're from? And I ask this specifically to Brad in part because we're from the same place. We're both from Stark County, Ohio, and I feel like that is extremely fundamental to who haven't lived there in a very long time, but still that is some deep part of who I am. And I also ask that of you because obviously, you wrote about another Midwestern city for your dissertation. Like, being Midwestern and thinking about the Midwest seems very instrumental to this idea of labor and what labor means. And, so, maybe start with Brad, but I think we could all maybe speak to that. Like, what do you think about, the sort of where you're from and contributing to sort of who you are and how you think?
That's a really good question. And yeah, anybody who's been to Canton, Ohio, first off, I'm sorry. I don't know what bet you lost that you ended up here. Maybe you were going to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but if you drive anywhere through Canton, Ohio, you're sort of smacked in the face with the past. It's everywhere around you. It's the empty lot that's right next to a really fancy new building. It's the factory that's still there, but all the windows have been busted out. You really can't escape it. I tell people, anyone who's ever driven into or through Detroit, it's sort of an amazing experience. Any direction from Detroit other than east, because that's Canada, any other direction from Detroit, there's just this ocean of rail yards and shipping yards and factories. And you have to take yourself back and go, gosh, 75 years ago, these would have been all going nonstop all the time. This was the 4th or 5th biggest city in the world at one point. All of this would have been going on. And you can't really get away from that when you grow up not having seen it yourself, but hearing about it from everybody. I'm sure Kelly can attest to this too. Everybody in this part of the country knows somebody who used to work in the auto industry, the glass industry, the steel industry, parts manufacturing, what have you. And everyone's always talking about, like, oh, bringing jobs back, like those commercials when politicians are like, we're bringing jobs back to America. they're talking about the entire country, but they're really, a lot of that language is coded at, this part of the country. And, every year around election time, when those people from the New York Times go on their Midwestern safaris and they're like, I walked into a cafe on Main Street. Well, that cafe on Main Street is usually some small town like Canton, Ohio, or even smaller. The Midwest ends up being kind of the butt of a lot of jokes historically and currently, but like, you can't get away from the realities when you live in a place where it's all around you like this. Like, half of Cleveland has been turned into a sort of new kind of more modern city. Half of Cleveland still looks like it's 1975. So when you grow up around all that stuff and you hear about the past, and everyone sort of seems to be more focused on the past than they are on the present or even the future, you start to wonder, well, what was the past like? What was so great about the past? How did we then get to where we are now? Like, how could something have been so great and so wonderful and recognized as so great and so wonderful, but how could we allow it to go away? Was it the fault of the people around here? Was it somebody else's fault? So I started getting into those questions when I started college, in the midst of what was the first of two generational economic collapses in my lifetime back in 2008, 2009, 2010. When things started to get really bad around here, those questions kind of were forced onto me. And then that's when I started looking into them for, kind of general sort of interest. And then eventually in my senior honors thesis, and then that spun off into to grad school. But you kind of grow up with the past all around you when you're from the Midwest. You really do.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. So, Michael, I know that you have the North Dakota state flag behind you. Do you currently live in North Dakota?
No, actually, I live in Bloomington, Minnesota, suburb of Minneapolis. Went to school there a very long time ago, but I keep the flag up. I don't know, I hung it up just because I'm a sportsman. I have a couple an animal mount on that, and so it might offend one of my coworkers or something. And so I just put that up so nobody gets offended, because as Brad had said earlier, yeah, the changing workplace, whatever. I went from having to drive, 25 miles each day to work and home. I'm now working from home and loving it. My stress level went way down for not having to deal with rush hour traffic. So I think it's great. And the fact is, I'm an older employee, but you can still, everything is available with online and a VPN and transfer of records through rooms and stuff. I'm an auditor. So, we already had stuff set up. So when it converted to everybody had to work from home, it's just like the bosses lose control, which is probably the hardest part, because, they can't look over your shoulder and see exactly what you're doing, but they probably can, because I'm sure they keystroke my computer, but that's all right. I'm not doing anything I shouldn't be. So, but yeah, it's just, and so, living in Minnesota, it's a great state, lots of fun. North Dakota was a good place to go to school. My son is in school at Michigan Tech in the UP, which he likes cold and snow, which, hey, whatever turns you on, but hey, good for him. So otherwise,
I have this image in my mind of people from Minnesota, Michigan, North Dakota as being sort of hardy. Like, is that, do you adopt that sort of persona if that's where you live? Do you reject it at all?
well, I guess, it's living in, Minneapolis, St. Paul area. You can be either way you want. I grew up where it was, hunting and fishing and things like that. And my interest in wine started because my mom collected wine, and as a kid, you get invited to the dinner table where all the adults were having wine, and my mom bought wine at auction back in the late 60s, early 70s, something like that. And it was like, there were some bottles from the 30s, and it's like, ooh, I'm drinking Spanish Riojas from the 30s, which, was pretty awesome. It was interesting. It's kind of like the light goes on when you try two wines, and how they evolve, and one of them tasted great at the first, and then the fruit all died. The other one, it tasted a little flat, and then it just kind of all of a sudden it just opened up after time, and it was really awesome. It's like, And I lived in Texas for a few years, and I worked in the alcohol industry, and I just, I always loved wine. And I found that the more you knew about wine, the better position you could have and the more fun you could have with it. And it's like, so, and I had my business for a while, and then I sold it, and then I'm kind of technically still in the alcohol business. I just work for the government now, auditing alcohol companies. So a little different, but making sure they're paying their taxes. So that's kind of my roundabout way to becoming a home winemaker. And the nice thing is I have a good friend that got me started on it, and we always talk about what we're doing and how you're doing it and everything. And it's just a blast. And as far as, the outdoor stuff, yeah, I mean, you either stay inside or go outside. I mean, I coached hockey teams for a long time. I played hockey growing up as a kid, and hockey's a great sport. Coaching was fun, except for, I don't know if anybody has parents, or kids, but the parents could be awful. I mean, reality is, I mean, I'd probably still be coaching, but my wife finally said no more, because she was tired of little Johnny doesn't think the coach likes him. Parents call me up and talking to me for an hour at 9:30 or 10 at night because they, or parents trying to tell me what to do. And it's like, and I was coaching teams that my kid wasn't even on. So it's just like, I was doing it because the love of the game and having fun working with the kids, get to meet the parents and whatever. And it's like, my kid was playing on other teams, and it's like, they needed somebody. It's like, sure, I'll do it. Give me something to do. And so just fun.
Yeah. I used to ref for youth soccer and youth baseball. And let me tell you, like, those parents they were something. Like, because I used to do it with my dad and my brother. We were like a team for the county, and like, I don't know how many times my dad had to throw people like out, like, you have to leave the premises. You cannot be here anymore. Like, you are ridiculous.
Yeah, sadly, I mean, I've had parents of some of the teams get thrown out of the arena, and I had to talk to them later. You can't do that.
My dad was my my baseball coach for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, I think. And nobody ever really got into an argument with my dad about who was playing or who wasn't playing, because my dad is like 6'4", like 260. And you get up to him and you go, wait a minute. And then you just start looking up and up and up. And you're like, you know what? I'm good. I'm fine. You did the right thing. So.
Yeah, well, when I coached, there was A teams, B teams, and C teams. And I coached the C team, which nobody wanted to coach, with the wider variance in talent. And it's just like, I had parents trying to, well, you're going to cut this kid out and you don't want to play him. It's like, well, you got to try to play everybody. And it's a tough challenge.
So one story that has stuck with me my whole life, when I was around 10, I was a cheerleader. I'm kind of embarrassed to say that for like youth football teams. And I didn't know very much about football, admittedly, and I would just go and do the cheers that they told me to do. My dad would come to the games, probably not to watch the cheerleaders, but to watch the football. And I distinctly remember a game where like everybody was just mad at the refs and, oh, they blew that call. And of course I was, just sort of swept up in it. Like, oh, they blew that call. That was terrible. I remember walking away from the game afterward and my dad was like, no, they were all wrong. The ref was right. Like, you shouldn't get swept up in the crowd. You should look at things objectively. And I just sort of never forgot that. But yeah, those parents were just terrible.
Yeah. That's a job that it's tough just because of the abuse they get. And they actually have a hard time finding people that want to do it nowadays, just because the parents are so rough on them.
Yeah.
Fortunately.
Go ahead, Jamie. You were about to.
Well, I had a thought, and then my dog started whining, and then I was like, "Wait, what was I thinking?" I don't remember. But funny, I was a cheerleader all the way from 3rd grade until 10th grade. I quit after 10th grade because it was too much politics. It was no fun anymore after that. So yeah, when I tell people that I was a cheerleader, they're like, what? No. No, not you.
I was just gonna say, like, I have to imagine, Michael, like I'm a huge hockey fan myself. I watch all the Olympic hockey, the World Cup hockey. I'm a big Penguins fan. And I have to imagine that like up in Minnesota and in North Dakota, that like it's just a sport that everyone has access to. Like it's a sport that like probably every high school has. And I was just wondering, like, are there issues of having access to equipment and stuff? Because like where Kelly and I are from, I think there's like 3 schools in the area that have hockey, and like they have to go and like travel to other parts of the state or to other states to play, to find enough people to play. And it's not really like OHSAA like sanctioned hockey. It's more just like very, very organized club hockey. Because like, you know, we don't really get quite enough of the cold weather to be able to play outside in the winter. And there's not that many ice skating rinks and stuff like that. So like, is it just like, is it as accessible as it seems like it is up there, or are there still problems of like having access to hockey rinks and equipment and stuff like that?
Well, when I was coaching, I mean, the city I live in, one of the largest cities in the state of Minnesota, and we have, 3 indoor rinks. And within probably 10 or 15 miles, there's probably another 25 or 30 indoor rinks. So having access to ice time was never really an issue. And I mean, like all the youth sports, when I was a kid growing up, you played football in the fall, hockey in the winter, and baseball or track in the spring. And then summertime, you just goofed off. But now sports are, year round. But as far as having access to it, I know that the association for the city I lived in when I coached, we had at least a couple kids I knew that were immigrants and they wanted to play hockey, and so we found equipment for them to play. And funny thing is the one kid, he ended up making it to the high school level and skating JV, and he might have even got to lace him up for a varsity game or two too. So it was good for him, for coming from a kid who didn't know how to skate, didn't grow up in Minnesota, came from Africa and moved here with his mom. And
That's nice.
yeah, it was great. It was good fun.
I can't remember if it was here or if it when I lived in Cincinnati, but I remember there was a story in the paper about a high school team that like had to basically like crowdsource funding to get enough equipment for everybody, because like anyone who's played or watches hockey knows the sticks break all the time. It's not like football helmets, it's not like baseball bats. Like high school students aren't usually going through a lot of baseball bats because they're using metal bats. I'd be shocked if a high school kid needed a new bat in the middle of the year. Like she's either swinging way too hard and maybe he's hitting it against the wall or something. But like hockey sticks break all the time, and they just ran out of sticks. And it was like, we don't have enough money for more sticks, and they had to crowdsource, which they were able to, but like it was a real problem. They kind of underestimated how many sticks they were going to need for a season.
Well, as a hockey parent, I found a junior team in town that bought the sticks for the players. So I worked with that guy when he placed an order. I placed an order for how many sticks I needed for my son. And I guess I overbought because he's still using them now, playing club hockey up at Michigan Tech. So he's getting my money's worth out of the sticks anyways. But yeah, I mean, it's like they're, I think the last time I looked, they were like, $250 to $350, $400 for a new stick. I mean, if you're sitting in a hockey rink and you see a tear rolling down a parent's cheek, it's because their kid was the one that just broke that stick on the ice.
I was watching the Olympics last night, and Michaela Schifrin brought 60 pairs of skis with her. And I was just like, how expensive? I realize these are Olympic athletes, but like, I can't imagine the expense of this kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, I'm sure they're getting them all comp, but yeah, I mean, just around is, but I suppose with something like that, it's like, I have a friend at our CrossFit gym that's a skier, and he's got, half a dozen pairs of skis because, it depends on, the snow conditions today are this, so I want to use these ones. And that's like, whatever the feel is, I guess, on this.
We won't talk about how many sets of knitting needles I have. It's the same in a lot of hobbies.
My sister's a big knitter, and pretty much everywhere she goes, she's got her bag of stuff. And she doesn't like where the conversation's going, or well, actually she'll talk a lot anyway. So yeah, the needles will be out and she'll be working away.
Yeah.
I really need a hobby. Like just listening to everybody, it's like, man, what do I spend my money on?
Jamie, I will teach you to knit happily. So, Brad, I want to ask you, I know that you have thought a lot about your fandom in Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and how that affected you wanting to be a historian. So I wanted you to expound on that a little bit. And I would also recommend to everybody that you watch the most recent episode of Something in Particular with Teddy and Arthur. Teddy and Arthur are my sons. They have a little YouTube show in which Brad talks to them about Lord of the Rings.
So this is actually the subject of an essay that I'm working on for a collection of essays. For those of you that follow me on Twitter, the essay collection that I'm constantly referring to, this is an example of one of them. So the first two things that I ever really got into as a kid on my own, like we always get into things that we see our like older siblings or cousins doing or our parents doing, but the first two things that I just got into because they just captivated me were Star Wars and the Lord of the Rings. And I just immediately got super immersed in both worlds. Like a lot of little boys, I think I was 7, 8 years old when I came to both of those things because, you know, Star Wars and Lord of the Rings were designed for children. But my love of those never really faded. If anything, they got stronger as I got older. And one of the ways that those two universes really got me into history is, first off, I just like stories. It's probably obvious to anybody who's been listening or watching to this that I'm a little on the talkative side. I like talking to people. I like listening to people talk about things. Like when podcasts first became a thing, I'm like, so I just get to listen to somebody talk about stuff for an indeterminate amount of time. That's amazing. And I love stories. I love storytelling. I like writing stories. I like hearing stories. And Lord of the Rings and Star Wars are nothing if not just good stories. You know what I mean? Like they're the kinds of stories that you could just tell somebody at like bedtime or read to your kids. Like they're that kind of story. And so the storytelling aspect of Star Wars and Lord of the Rings always really appealed to me. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was so drawn to them and remain so drawn to them. But as I got older, and I'm also nothing, you know, setting aside being a little bit garrulous, I'm also nothing if not a little obsessive. I read the Lord of the Rings every single year. Same time every year, I read the Lord of the Rings at the start of the academic year, like right before I'm about to go to school or used to be going to school because I'm done now. I would read the Lord of the Rings. And I watch Star Wars 2-3 times a year. And one of the things that I really noticed as I started to like really get into Star Wars, you know, and really, especially Lord of the Rings, get into Lord of the Rings on like the 4th, 5th, 20th reading. The importance in both of those universes on knowing the past. So like take either or both of them. Star Wars. There's this sort of unknown but known past that comes back in A New Hope. That sort of is the motivating plot device. You know, who is Anakin Skywalker? Who is Darth Vader? What was the Force? Who were the Jedi? What was life like before the Empire? You know, the thing that really sets the entire plot in motion is Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Obi-Wan basically just tells Luke's personal past. You know, Luke is kind of ignorant of his own past. Obi-Wan tells him, and that sets off the adventure. The Lord of the Rings, kind of the same thing. If you just start with the Lord of the Rings, if you don't start with the Hobbit, knowing the past, knowing the truth of Bilbo's story is what sets the Lord of the Rings in motion. And even throughout the Lord of the Rings, the past is super important. And I love this. I always use this example when I'm talking to my students. Like Gandalf is the best character in the Lord of the Rings for a couple of reasons. One, he's played by Ian McKellen in the movies, who doesn't love Ian McKellen? But also the first thing that Gandalf does when he's stumped by the mystery of Frodo's ring, of Bilbo's ring, he knows it's a magic ring. He doesn't know exactly in what capacity is it magical. Rather than just like tinker with it and possibly mess things up, he just leaves and he goes to a library. Like that's essentially what Gandalf does. He's like, damn it, I don't know, books. That's the answer, books. And that always really appealed to me too. And I think that like that sort of inquisitive nature of Gandalf, of the hobbits, of Tolkien himself. I mean, Tolkien was an academic. He was a very inquisitive person. I think that aspect of Lord of the Rings and really that aspect of Star Wars too, because Lucas is drawing on a lot of history and mythology and then contemporary politics and stuff. There's so much history sort of laden in those two universes that you can't really get away from them. A lot of historians that I know like either one or both of those things, or they like things like Star Trek, or they like things like Harry Potter. They like things that, have that sort of built-in history, that sort of lived-in old kind of component. Like you feel like Middle Earth is a real place. Like you can feel the 10,000 years of Middle Earth. You can feel the age in Star Wars. Despite the fact that it's set a long time ago, you can feel that even that long time ago is an old, worn out, traveled place. And so I think there's a lot of historical and storytelling aspects of those two universes that really spoke to me when I was young. And not until I got older did I realize why they spoke to me. So I think my love of those two things led me to my love of books, which is a real problem, which then led to my love. Everybody on the call just laughed. You can't see behind me in my parents' basement here, but there's like between probably 1,100 and 1,500 books on the other side of me here in boxes. There's another probably 1,000 in boxes upstairs. Like I have a lot of books. But my love of those two things led to a love of books, which led to a love of history. And so I can't really disentangle the career track that I went on, career track, the academic track that I went on, and my love of those two things. They're very tied.
I mean, I definitely feel that. Like, so I was just at that like perfect age for Harry Potter. Like I literally was the same age they were when the book started. And so I like grew up with them. And of course, now that I'm older, like I know there's all sorts of problems in the series and we won't even talk about she who shall not be named and her problems. But it was, sort of a similar thing where, I'd always been into history because of my mom, but like Harry Potter was the first thing I got into for myself. And it just reinforced like all of the things that I had enjoyed about reading history books with my mom and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I never really thought about that connection to Harry Potter and like how I got to where I am. But it's interesting because of course, my favorite character is Hermione because it's the same thing. She doesn't know the answer. Well, she's going to the library. I had you looking in the wrong section, like I love it.
I always maintain that like whenever you tell somebody that you're a historian, I'm sure this happens to Jamie a lot, like whether it's people you're teaching or people you're talking to, they're like, oh, I hate history. And I'm sure there's math professors and biologists out there that have the same thing that happens. Oh, I hate math. I was terrible at math. No one hates small h history. They hate big H history. They hate history as a discipline because when they were taught it in high school or in college, they probably had somebody teach it who, not a criticism of that person, probably taught a lot of dates and figures and like those really awful tests where it was like, in what year was the Emancipation Proclamation signed? And it's like, like when is that ever going to be a relevant piece of information? Knowing the content, super important. The date, like I know that it happened before this other thing, but I don't know the exact date and time. But everyone likes small h history. Everyone likes to know the history of their family, and you can see it by the popularity of things like ancestry.com. What's the other one that's really popular? Is it 23andMe is the DNA thing. There's another one that's similar to that. Those things are really popular. I mean, look at the number of prestige TV shows that are about the past. One of the things that makes them interesting is we're dealing with, actual historical figures or like semi kind of amalgams of historical figures. And that really draws people in. So everyone likes the past in the sense of like learning about stories and how things happen, but not everyone, and rightfully so, likes the way that the past is taught. I have a PhD in history. I don't like the way that the past is taught. I didn't like the way that it was taught when I was learning it, even, 4 years ago or so. But nobody dislikes small h history. It's big H history that people don't like. And so when you can find a way to kind of get people to like small h history by getting them something that they can kind of, digest, that's a little bit more palatable, like something that just is a story. That's when you can get people to really, really enjoy the nuances of the past, where you can get people to start getting into, oh, well, what would have happened if, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, my students would always come in when I was teaching full time, and they would be like, I'm terrible at history. I don't like history. It's no fun. It's whatever. And they would get my syllabus, and they would be like, I would be like, what? And they're like, there's no tests. And I was like, I know. And they're like, why are there no tests? And I'm like, because that's not how you learn history. Like, you're going to write papers, you're going to do primary source activities, you're going to do, all these other things you will learn, but you're not going to be tested. Like, because I don't care if you know what year, the Emancipation Proclamation was issued. Like, I want you to know what it was and why it's important, but I could give two shits if you know the year, like, unless you're going on Jeopardy, and in which case, I get a cut of that. Like, it doesn't matter, to be honest. Like,
yeah, well, and
this
that's
all
another
sounds
thing.
like an excellent commercial for unsung history.
Yeah, when you tell people you're a historian, they're like, oh, you must be great at Jeopardy. I am, but for completely different reasons that are not related. Like, it's purely coincidence I'm really good at Jeopardy and also a historian.
I'm sure I have told this story before, but a million years ago, when I was a teaching assistant, I was TAing in religion in the Middle Ages, and one of my fellow TAs got a teaching evaluation that said, too much focus on critical thinking. I was like, what do you think you're taking religious studies for? Yes.
Well, I would agree that small doses of history are fun. I mean, like I picked up a book to read about Cornelius Vanderbilt, because I went to North Carolina to Asheville to go visit the Biltmore. Took my parents on a trip there, and I wanted to figure out, okay, the Biltmore, the largest house in the country. I mean, it's an awesome experience. If somebody's never been, it's worth the trip. But I wanted to figure out how they got all that money, and I mean, it was phenomenal history. Reading the history on how he did it and what he did in New York City was pretty incredible. Pretty ruthless on some of the stuff, but I mean, it's interesting to see what he did and how he got the money and how he accumulated it, and what the family did with it, build the big house, which is pretty impressive. But it was fun to take the trip, because that way I had a really good historical background. So when I'm taking the tours, then everything started to click. Made it a lot more fun.
What's really fun is when you can find a way to investigate history more broadly, but even a more specific topic, and find a way to give it some sort of like contemporary relevancy. Because as great as it is to study more like arcane aspects of the past, and like, who doesn't love a theoretical question of like, who would win in a battle, a samurai or a medieval knight? Like, finding more practical ways to kind of talk about the past can be really, really fun. Like, I love, like, so this is a small example just from my own life in the last few years. I went to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, and so I lived there for 6 years while I was getting my dissertation. And how apocryphal parts of the story are, I don't know, and I'm sure some of the details will be skewed here, but Pennsylvania has really, really arcane, seemingly, anachronistic liquor laws, drawing it back to the theme of Uncorked History. It's very, very like straight out of Prohibition, like Volstead Act 101. There was a wine collector in Pittsburgh who, he had a store where people could go in and buy wine just like off of the shelf and stuff. But he also had sort of like a club, like you could pay to be like a member at his wine club, and they would have wine tastings where like you could buy wine, you would come and you could open the wine, you would learn about the wine, all kinds of really cool stuff. But he was limited by what he could get. And so he decided to just go and buy a whole bunch of stuff. And I don't remember where. I think it was domestically. I don't think he left the country to do this. But he went and got a whole bunch of wine. Like, I can't remember the number of bottles, but it was several hundred bottles, something like $10,000-$15,000 worth of wine. Some of it was stuff that his customers had requested that they couldn't get anywhere else. Some of it was just stuff that he saw and was like, oh, that's really cool. I'm sure that my customers would like this. And so he got it and he brought it back to Pennsylvania, brought it back to Pittsburgh, and he was going to sell it. Somehow it got discovered that he had all this wine, and the state liquor authority, just full on Elliot Ness style, broke down the doors and was like, and they confiscated his wine. And they were like, you cannot sell this wine. We're taking this wine. This is going to the state. And he was like, well, there's like thousands and thousands of dollars of wine here. Like, surely there has to be some kind of middle ground between me selling it to my clients, to my customers, and you just like breaking the neck and pouring it down the gutter. They were like, nope, absolutely not. He's like, well, what about this? What if we auction the wine off to the hospitals? Because if it's because again, this is how Pennsylvania's liquor laws are. Alcohol purchased from out of state can be used in state for like medicinal purposes. And a hospital auction is apparently medicinal enough. And the state liquor authority was like, nope, still no dice. And they ended up just taking all of that wine and just dumping it down the drain, whether it was literally dumping it down the drain or, a more figurative kind of excommunication of the wine. They just got rid of it. And someone was telling me the story, probably at a bar. And I was just amazed. And I looked it up, and like Pennsylvania is one of those states, Commonwealth, that still has like prohibition, pre-prohibition era liquor laws on the books. And it's one of the reasons why Pennsylvania is one of those places where like you can't go buy wine or beer at a gas station. I lived in Ohio the first 25 years of my life. There's a gas station down the street. I can go there any day of the week, anytime that they're open, and buy as much beer as I want and as much wine as I want. The only thing I can't get there are foolproof bottles of liquor. Like I couldn't buy this whiskey there, but I could buy, this is 80 proof. I could go there and buy 40 proof liquor in like those little pint bottles or whatever. Pennsylvania, you can't do that. And I just assumed that it was one of those things that's like, well, they might still have like actual state stores. It's like, no, it's because like Pennsylvania is like 2 small rocks throws away from being a dry state. It's part of the reason why Pittsburgh has more bars per capita, because it's just too damn hard to buy alcohol anywhere.
Yeah, I grew up in North Carolina, and so I was used to North Carolina's liquor laws, and it was like you could get beer and wine anywhere, like gas station, grocery store, whatever. But the only limitation was that you had to wait until after 12 p.m. on Sundays. Like you couldn't purchase it before 12 p.m. And I was like, whatever, I don't get it, but I'll wait. But you had a separate ABC store for liquor. And I was like, okay, got used to that. And then I moved to Maryland, and I'm looking everywhere in the grocery store for wine and beer, and it's just not there. And it's like, you can only go to the package store where you can get wine, beer, and liquor. And they're not open on Sundays. So if you didn't get it on Saturday, you are screwed. And like, then I went to visit Louisiana, and it was like, there's liquor in the grocery store. And I was like, what is this magic? Like, this is amazing. The liquor laws in this country are very bizarre to me, especially growing up in the South, like some of the southern states. It doesn't make any sense.
I mean, Minnesota is similar to your one, where you can only buy it in liquor stores, and you can't buy it in the grocery store. But then Minnesota had a deal where they had 3-2 beers, so you can get like weaker beer in the grocery store, which really isn't very good. But
in Chicago, you can get anything anywhere, but you head up to Evanston, just north of Chicago, and you can't get anything. Home of Prohibition.
Michael, what, if any, limitations do you have as a home winemaker? Like, I noticed every time you talked about having wine for your friends and family, you specifically said like giving it as gifts. Like, you can't just do it as like as a business or anything. Like, what limitations do you have in terms of like, your ability to sell it or not sell it? How much can you make at a time? Like, how much can you order of the raw ingredients? Like, are there any limitations on that?
As far as I know, I don't think there's a limitation. I hope not, because I might be close to the limit if there is. But I can't sell it unless I were to get licensed for it. And I don't think I'd really make enough to sell it. But I mean, I work in the alcohol business for the state. So I mean, I know the process you'd have to do to get licensed for it. And I'm just a home winemaker, and I make extra and I share with friends and family, whatever. It's like, just to give you an idea, it's like when I started out making wine, I don't know if you guys can see the little strip label where you put what's on it. And then I went to a canning label where I can use a chalk, put whatever the wine is. And now I've upgraded to, I created my own label. Well, I had a friend create my label. So
I love that.
I named it Bubba McChicken, which is kind
That's your Twitter handle, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of my nickname. And then the guy sitting there has got the NDSU colors in the collar, because my buddy who helped make the label, design the label for me, he went to South Dakota State, and he knows I'm a Bison fan, and their colors are blue and yellow. So he says, I'll make it green and yellow on the label for you, just for kind of fun. So it's like, you can do whatever you want with the home winemaking. I kind of go overboard, but it's like, it's my hobby. That's what I do. I do read a lot of books and stuff, not a lot of history books, but and I do like movies. I'm a big James Bond fan. Love the James Bond movies.
Well, I think that is a good segue into Jamie's favorite segment. So, Jamie, take it away.
Yes. So at the end of each episode, we like to have everyone give their recommendations or their suggestions for things that our audience members might like or enjoy. So it can be like a book, it can be a TV show or a movie, or, your favorite hand lotion. I don't know, like, just what is it that you would recommend to our audience?
Am I up?
Yeah, go ahead if you want.
All right. Well, I guess the book I'd recommend is right here. This is my current reading material by Brad Taylor. Very good story, fast moving, a lot of current events, geopolitical type things. I read a lot. I tend to read a lot of books. I have a weekend job where I get a chance to read a lot of books as a weekend security guard. So I like spy books and adventure books. And then my wife and I watched a series on TV that was really hilarious. And if you want to watch something, it was it Only Murders in the Building? I think it's based in New York City, something like that. That's worth watching. It was good fun, and just, it kept you on your toes, wondering, guessing what's happening next, and it's very entertaining.
It's got a lot of podcast humor too.
Yeah. It's the podcast deal. That's how they, trying to solve the movie. That's right.
Yeah.
Or solve the murder.
I have, oh gosh, I thought about this because I knew this was one of the more popular segments, and this was Jamie's favorite part of the show. Red Wing boots. If you need like proper boots that have like actual traction and insulation, Red Wing boots. I used to wear them for work all the time. I still wear them for in the winter. They're great. They measure your foot. They do all these like contours of your foot to figure out what model would fit you best. You get like free replacement laces, leatherwork stitching, the inside of the boot, everything except for the treads of the boot, they replace for free for the life of the boot. And the treads on the boot, they're replaced for like half the price of the boot. So, if you're buying boots every couple of years and buying an entirely new pair, get a pair of Red Wing boots. You only have to replace the treads every like 6-7 years or whatever. I've had the same pair for 10 years now. Red Wing boots, Levi 569 jeans, always good. If you're like me and you've got like rather large thighs, but still want to wear jeans that are kind of slimming, but you don't want to like paint a pair of pants on, Levi 569s have a nice slimming effect. I'm a huge fan of Moleskine notebooks, the classic little black notebook. I like the soft cover ones. Those are really nice. it's hard for me to recommend a specific book because I'm reading nonstop. But I recently, like in the last week, reread Giovanni's Room by the late great James Baldwin. It's a wonderful, it's a short little novel, but it's a wonderful little novel about queer sexuality in the 1950s, I think, is when it's actually set. But it has a lot of resonance now. Everything James Baldwin wrote is fantastic. You know, his letters, you know, his, you know, the envelopes on the letters that he sent are probably worth reading. Definitely recommend that. And I'm not usually one for a police procedural drama, but I've gotten really into rewatching Castle on Hulu because, like, Nathan Fillion is just kind of great, and it's a fun, kind of quirky show. A lot of good literary references in there, so recommend that as well. And actually, I recommend this Quietman whiskey if you have a hard time finding single malt Irish whiskey that's kind of affordable. This bottle was like $33 in Ohio. So like in most of the Midwest, probably about the same. In the DMV area, maybe a little bit more. Not crazy expensive. It's not like going and buying a bottle of Redbreast that's going to run you like, you know, 60, 70, maybe more dollars. So those are my recommendations.
My favorite part of Castle is when he puts on the bulletproof vest that says writer on the back.
Yeah. My real favorite moment is like some real hardcore fan service in like season 3 when it's the Halloween episode and he's dressing up as a space cowboy, but it's just his outfit from Firefly. Like for Firefly fans out there, when he just dresses up as Malcolm Reynolds, but his daughter's like, "Dad, what are you doing?" "I'm a space cowboy." It's like, we know what you are. You're just on a different network and you can't afford the rights. That's okay.
That's awesome. So I have 2 recommendations today. One is Brad mentioned earlier, if you're looking at history and can connect it to the present. If you're not already reading on the Washington Post, the Made by History series, it's just an amazing series of op-eds. There's usually 1 or 2 a day. I actually set up like a Google alert so I would catch all of them, and they're just incredibly well written by historians, but connecting it to the present moment. And then my other one is much less serious. So I have a fondness for the subgenre of mystery novel that is like the cozy Regency romance mystery novel. I am currently reading a series by Lynn Messina, and it's the Beatrice Hyde-Clare Mysteries, set in London. It's got everything. I think there's like 10 books in the series. I started reading like 3 days ago and I'm on book 4 already, so that'll tell you something about how addictive they are. But it's got all the sort of classic tropes of the genre. It starts with like the main character who's a poor relation is at a dinner party and she's ready to throw food at a guy, and of course that guy is going to be the wealthy duke that she eventually wants to get with. Anyway, it's just a really lovely series. So the first book in the series is called A Brazen Curiosity, and if you have Kindle Unlimited, they are free on Kindle Unlimited. So those are my recommendations.
Very nice. Well, in addition to my recommendation that you immediately go and buy yourself or find yourself or adopt yourself 2 beautiful, whiny boxer puppies. They will make your life infinitely better. My recommendation, if you're into like trivia shows and like the drama of like, are they going to win money? Or are they not going to win money? My husband and I came across this show on Netflix called The Chase. And so there's this, you get 3 people and they have to, each of them answers a series of trivia questions to rack up money. And then they have to go face the beast in a head-to-head trivia battle. And they have to try to make it down the board, put their money in the bank. If he catches them before they do, then they're out. But if they bank their money, they go back, and whoever survives, they do a final head-to-head with the beast with all of them. And if he doesn't, catch them, then they all split the money. It's really interesting because the beast is this guy from England, and apparently he's like the top ranked trivia person in the world, or something like that. And he's like a math professor at Oxford or something, like ridiculous. But it is a very, very fun show. And there are plenty of times where they have questions that it's like, when she's reading the question out, you know that it's like pure innuendo, and it's hilarious because she is incredibly embarrassed every time she has to do that.
Have you seen some of the newer ones? Because now they have like Ken Jennings on there. And yeah, so for like the first 4 or 5 seasons, my mom and dad love the show, and they've made me watch it with them. For a while it was called The Beast because it was after the Beast guy, and then they changed it, and now like he's on there, and then Ken Jennings is on there. They have like 4 different trivia guys. What's the other guy that on Jeopardy like 4 years ago, James Holznauer, the guy that was the first person to like bet the really big amounts and like go for all the huge amounts on Jeopardy. He's on there, and now they rotate and stuff. And like the other 3 trivia guys sit in a room and watch and just make fun of the guy who's competing. Like, I wouldn't have got that question wrong, James. I'd have got that right. Like, it's made it a lot more comical because they just constantly rib on one another.
All right. Well, everyone should take all of those recommendations and go enjoy. And I'm going to go eat my dinner now because I haven't eaten yet. This wine is getting to my head. So thank you, Brad. Thank you, Michael. This was a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you guys for joining us. And thank you, everyone who attended. It was awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, guys.